Well, hi folks, this is Darren with My RV Works with another exciting series of 10 minutes with the tech. We're going to spend 10 minutes to answer some questions that we've received that have come through all the different ways that they come through. And we're going to jump right into some questions that folks have asked. And so Connie here has a question on, here's Connie's question. It has to do with refrigerator. What would cause a domestic refrigerator to keep kicking off? We changed the thermo disc and it ran for about a half an hour. So basically, Connie, what you're saying is refrigerator ran for half an hour and then it just didn't work. But during that half hour, it seemed to be working just fine. As a technician, I need to know a little bit more about what that means. Did it work? Because the bad thing about a refrigerator is there's really no way to know if it's working until 6, 7, 8 hours later after you've done something. Now, you said you changed your thermo disc. I'd like to know a little bit more about what a thermo disc is. There's a lot of things on a refrigerator. If you look at the nomenclature on all the parts, there's nothing called a thermo disc. Not that I'm aware of. On your boiler stack, on some of your domestics, you do have a little high temperature relay. It's like a high temperature sensor. You have a little push button on there. On some of your domestics, down behind, you have a thermal fuse. Up at the top on your condenser fin, you have a fan relay. Inside, you have a thermistor. So I need to know more about what the thermo disc was that you replaced. But regarding that, when you say that you ran your refrigerator for half an hour, I'd like to know if you ran it on AC or LP. I'd like to know which one of those two you ran it on. If I was diagnosing this, if it's not working on one, try the other, see if that's going to work, and that'll help us understand if it's a cooling unit problem or if it's a controller problem. I'd like to also know what mode that refrigerator was in. Did you have it on automatic mode or did you force it into LP or electric? So here it is. It's only running for half an hour and it tripped off. What would cause it to trip off? I need to know those things. So if it did trip itself off, I need to know, did it lose power? In other words, does that control board at all times have 12 volts feeding that? If what caused it to trip out was a 12 volt something upstream of the refrigerator that it didn't get 12 volts, then you got a problem, not with the refrigerator, you got a problem feeding the 12 volts. So I would like to know that. I would like to know so let's make some assumptions on this refrigerator that keeps turning itself off. I need to know that there's 12 volts always feeding that refrigerator. I need to know, I'd like to put it on electric only, okay? Because electric only, there's a lot less that could go wrong. On the LP side, there's a lot more that can go wrong. We got a video that we're going to be coming out with where we're going to go really, really deep into the whole LP side, the gas valve side of the refrigerator. We're not doing that on this thing. I got 7 minutes left. So on that refrigerator, I want to verify you got 12 volts. I want to know that it's locked into electric mode and let's let it run. And then if it turns itself off, well, then we have a chance to look at some other things. But before I start changing parts, I'd like to know a little bit more about what the thermo disc was that you replaced. Okay, so if that helps, but anyway, I need to know if it always had all times had 12 volts feeding it and what mode it was on. Okay, so I'm gonna move on. Larry, I got 6.5 minutes left. Larry, on the water heater, he watched a water heater video, and I remember that video. It's the one where I show you how you can check if your heating element's good. I had Dakota with me on that day. We spent the night in the service trailer the night before, so we were pretty rough. I don't think we were, our mugs here were in that video. But he says, I have 120 volts at the breaker. Should I have 120 volts at the little electric toggle switch? So I'm assuming this is a Suburban water heater because they have, I'm going to assume it's a Suburban water heater. The Suburbans are the ones that have the little black switches on the front lower left corner. The Atwoods don't have that switch. He said he installed a new element just for general principle and the LP works fine, so it's not the thermostat. So let me get my head wrapped on what you got. I'm going to assume you have a Suburban water heater because it's got the toggle switch. Your breaker is on at the breaker panel. You're feeding 120 volts, the breaker that says water heater, but you're not getting 120 volts down at that switch. That circuit could go one of two ways depending on how the manufacturer wired your RV. Some manufacturers, they're going to send that 120 volts directly from the breaker, and then they're going to go directly to that switch. From the switch, it's then going to go up to the, it's going to go from the breaker to a junction box on the side of the water heater. From the side of the junction box on the water heater, it's going to go to the switch. From the switch, then it's going to go through the thermostat. And then from the thermostat, it's going to go to the electric heating element. So it's a very short circuit once it gets into the water heater. It's going to go from heating element, thermostat. On your Suburbans, you have two thermostats. You have the low side DC thermostats, and you have the high side 120 volt thermostats. They're both rated the same, but there are two. One's for 120 volts, one's for DC. Now, but what you're saying is what I'd be curious about is if you can gain access to that water heater, verify that that junction box is good, that your wires are still intact at that junction box. If you're outside looking at your water heater, it's going to be in the upper left-hand side. Sometimes you can get behind that. If your breaker is on, but you do not have 120 volts at that junction box, then what probably is the case is what your manufacturer did is on your monitor panel where you can turn the switches on and off for gas or electric. A lot of times they feed 12 volts to that whole panel, and that's a smart thing because you don't want high voltage and low voltage all on one panel. So that little switch that you see there on that monitor panel that'll feed 12 volts to turn on the AC heating element, a lot of times it's a 12 volt switch, and that 12 volt switch is controlling a relay. Who knows where those things are? I found those things everywhere. But a lot of times they're down behind a panel somewhere and you'll find a relay. Sometimes those are like lighting relays that you see on a car, those big like square looking deals that have the prongs sticking up. It could be a relay like that. I've seen where those relays have failed. And so basically the circuit then is you have 120 leaving your breaker panel, going through that relay. That relay is controlled from the 12 volt switch in your monitor panel. Then it leaves that relay and it goes to that junction box, and then it goes into your water heater. So for you, Larry, I would look at either the junction box wiring or look for the relay, and you would know there's going to be a relay if the switch that controls that is 12 volts. Okay, so let's do another one here. Joe's got a question on a water pump. Okay, so I'm going to read this question. I'm going to try to paraphrase. One thing I think we might do with the team is make these questions a little smaller. This is pretty long here. So Joe had a question. Joe's question is this. Great video, Darren. You're welcome, Joe. I'm glad you appreciated it. Thanks for watching. I was hoping you had a troubleshooting video on the low side latching controller. And that's in low side latching controller. Okay. For no pump when the switches are activated. I'm familiar with this. It's going to be like typically a class A, then you can turn your water pump on from the kitchen, the bathroom, or down in the wet bay. You just flip the switch, and then it's basically in your house you have the 3-way, 4-way switches, so you can turn lights on from different places. It's one of those types of things. And so that's the kind of switch he's got. That's the kind of setup he's got. Yep, Class A. Okay. Our Class A Holiday Rambler. Okay, so that's even more confirmation on what you're dealing with there. Our Class A water pump will not turn on when any of the 3 switches are turned on. Okay, but the little red light illuminates by the switch. Am I down to replacing the pump? Okay, Joe. Let's talk about these 3 switches and the low side controller. I'm familiar with those controllers. They could have wired it more like a 4-way switch in your house, but they didn't. What they did was they wired each switch to a controller and let the controller make the decision. Not a problem. It's all fine. It does make it a little bit dicey to troubleshoot this. What I need you to do is I need you to confirm, okay, and don't worry about that little red light. That little red light is there just for that little switch thing right there. So in your mind, don't think about the red light. What I need you to do is follow the trail of 12 volts. What I need you to do is verify 12 volts is feeding each switch, and then go to the controller and have the switch cycled and verify 12 volts is making it into that little controller. Okay, so we're following the trail of 12 volts. You got to do that 3 times. Do I have it at my 3 switches? And when those switches change states, is it feeding 12 volts into my low side controller? If that is correct, good. We know that the input side of our controller is good. Now you're going to check 12 volts leaving the controller. When any one of those switches goes high, you should have 12 volts leaving it. If you do have 12 volts leaving that, great. Then that controller is fine. But if any of those instances is not correct, then the controller is not right. If you want to check your pump directly, then you can take 12 volts directly and feed the pump directly. Sometimes it's a red and a black wire, depending on the manufacturer. I've seen typically it's going to be red and black on those, not black and black and not red and red. It's going to be red and black. I would fuse the red side. But if you want to check that pump, you may have seen in my video where I take my little test leads and my battery pack. You could use jumper cables, anything, but just test that pump. And so I don't think just because you're flipping your switches and the red lights come on that it's automatically the pump. It could be that low side controller. So let's check that low side controller, all with your 12 volts, follow the trail. And if you want to check your pump, check it that way. Okay, so those are the questions we have for this session. And if you liked it, thumb it up, subscribe, consider joining us on Patreon at $5 a month. And we'll see you on the next 10 Minute with a Tech video. This is Darren signing off.